A lot of people think they can buy 20 cows, sell a few calves every year, and quit their job. I used to think something similar. Then I sat down and ran the numbers. If your goal is replacing a $75,000 salary, the answer is probably a lot bigger than you think. What's interesting is some farmers with 200 animals still need a day job, while others with far fewer animals are making six figures. The difference has nothing to do with herd size. My name is James Miller. I've spent the last several years buying land, running livestock, and figuring out which animals actually pay and which ones just eat your savings. This channel is where I break down the real numbers behind farm income, so you're not guessing with your own money. If you're thinking about land or livestock as your way out of a job, subscribe, because I run numbers like this every week. Here's the thing nobody tells you when you start dreaming about this life. The dream is never about the animal. It's about waking up without an alarm clock screaming at you. It's about owning something instead of renting your whole life to a paycheck. I had that exact dream sitting in a cubicle for almost 9 years. I used to pull up land listings on my lunch break instead of eating. 40 acres here, 80 acres there, prices I couldn't even afford yet, just to feel something different than spreadsheets and conference calls. The problem is, almost nobody runs the actual math before they jump. They see a YouTube video of someone walking through a pasture at sunset and they think, that's it, that's the whole business model. It's not. There's a number behind that sunset, and most people never calculate it. So before we get into cows, sheep, chickens, any of it, you need one number first. Not a dream number, a real one. The amount of actual cash after expenses, after taxes, that replaces what your job pays you right now. Let's use $75,000 because that's a realistic number for a lot of people watching this. Not rich, not poor, just a normal, solid income that pays a mortgage and keeps the lights on. Here's where people mess up immediately. They think $75,000 means they need to sell $75,000 worth of cattle. That's revenue. Revenue is not what pays your bills. Profit is what pays your bills, and profit is usually a fraction of revenue once you count feed, vet bills, fuel, fencing, and the truck payment you forgot about. So if you're netting, say, 40% on your animals after every single cost, that $75,000 target actually means you need close to $190,000 in sales. I know, that number stops people cold the first time they hear it. Now add taxes. Self-employment tax alone can eat 15% before federal and state even touch it. And if you're smart, you're also setting aside a buffer for the year a drought hits or a sickness wipes out part of your flock, because that year is coming. It's not a maybe. So your real target isn't 75,000. It's closer to 90, maybe 100, once you build in the buffer most people skip. That's the number we're actually solving for. Now let's talk about how many animals it takes to get there, starting with the one almost everybody picks first. Cows. Cattle is the first animal almost everyone reaches for. It feels like real farming. Big animals, big pastures, the whole picture in your head. Here's something wild though. Right now, the U.S. cattle herd is sitting at its smallest size in about 75 years. 3/4 of a century. That's pushed prices to some of the highest levels cattle producers have ever seen. A 550-pound calf right now can sell for more than $2,500. 5 years ago, that same calf might have brought half that. So if you already own cows, this is a genuinely good time. But if you're trying to buy in fresh, you're paying historically high prices to get started, which changes the math completely. A cow-calf operation, after every cost, might net you somewhere between $300 and $600 per cow per year. Not per month, per year. So if your real target is $90,000, you're looking at something like 150 to 200 head of cattle just to hit that number with cows alone. That's not a hobby herd. That's a real operation, real acreage, and usually real debt to get there. I made this mistake myself early on. I bought in the cattle because it felt like the obvious move, not because I'd run the numbers. It took me 2 years to realize I was working a second unpaid job just to feed animals that wouldn't pay me back for another year. So cattle works. But cattle alone, for most people starting out, is the slowest road to that paycheck. There's a faster one, and it's smaller than you'd expect. Sheep and goats get overlooked, and that always surprised me. They mature faster than cattle, you can run more of them per acre, and the land you need to start is a lot smaller than what cattle demands. A meat goat sold direct to a local buyer might net you somewhere between $50 and $150 a head. That sounds small next to a cow, but here's the catch. You can run 6 to 8 goats on the same acre that supports one single cow, depending on your region. So per acre, goats can actually out-earn cattle. Not per animal, per acre. That's the number that matters when your land is limited, which for most people starting out, it is. I met a guy 2 summers ago running 80 goats on 12 acres he was leasing, not owning. 12 acres. He was clearing somewhere around $7,000 a year just from that flock, on land he didn't even have to buy. He used that cash flow to put a down payment on his own place 18 months later. That's the part people miss. Goats and sheep aren't usually the animal that replaces your whole salary by themselves, but they're often the animal that gets you your first real proof that this works and the capital to go bigger. Which brings up the real lever in all of this, and it has nothing to do with the animal at all. There was a university study that tracked a bunch of small chicken farms doing almost the exact same thing. Same birds, same feed, same setup more or less. And the results ranged from a farm actually losing about $3 on every bird to a farm making $7 profit on every single bird. Same animal, completely different outcome. So what was different? It wasn't the chickens. It was who they sold to. The farms losing money were selling at commodity prices, basically competing with the grocery store. The farms making real money were selling direct, farmers markets, local buyers, people who wanted to know exactly whose farm their meat came from. Some operations selling direct, premium, pasture-raised chicken are pulling close to $15 in profit per bird. That's nearly 5 times the margin of the farms doing the exact same work and selling wholesale. This is true across every animal we've talked about today. Cattle sold direct as freezer beef instead of through a sale barn. Goats sold to a known local buyer instead of a livestock auction. Eggs sold at $6 or $8 a dozen at a market instead of $3 wholesale. The animal barely matters compared to this one decision. Who are you selling to, and are you willing to do the work of finding that buyer yourself instead of taking whatever the truck driver offers you on a Tuesday? This is exactly where small farms start beating big farms, by the way. A 1,000-acre operation can't call up 40 families personally. You can. Now here's the part that's a little uncomfortable, but I'd rather tell you now than have you find out the hard way. Most people who fail at this don't fail because the animals didn't work. They fail because they went into debt for a new truck and a fancy barn before they ever sold a single animal. I've watched this happen more than once. Someone gets excited, finances $80,000 of equipment in year 1, and then spends the next 5 years working their day job just to make the payments on a farm that hasn't turned a profit yet. Equipment doesn't make you money. Animals and customers make you money. Everything else is just overhead pretending to be progress. The other mistake is expanding too fast, going from 20 animals to 200 before you've even figured out who's buying the first 20. You end up with a freezer full of meat and no buyers, which happened to a guy I knew his very first year. 500 chickens, and he was practically giving meat away by November because he never built the customer list first. So here's the actual order that works. Start small. Find your buyers before you scale. Buy income-producing animals before you buy anything that just looks good in a photo. Reinvest the profit instead of borrowing against the dream. That's the boring part nobody puts in the thumbnail, but it's the part that decides who's still doing this in 5 years and who's back at a desk job by next spring. Let me tell you about a guy I'll just call Mark, because that's not actually his name. Mark worked in logistics 45 hours a week, and he started with 6 goats and 20 laying hens on 5 acres his wife had inherited. First year, he made almost nothing, maybe $2,000 after expenses. Honestly, that would have scared most people off, but he didn't quit his job. He just kept the farm running on weekends, and he kept every single dollar of profit inside the farm instead of spending it. Year 2, he added pigs. Year 3, he doubled the laying flock and started selling eggs at 2 farmers markets instead of 1. By year 4, the farm was clearing about $58,000 a year. His job was paying him $71,000. He didn't quit yet. He waited one more year, got the farm up to 80,000, and then he gave his notice. He told me the actual quitting moment wasn't dramatic at all. It was just a Tuesday. He looked at a spreadsheet, saw 2 numbers had finally crossed, and that was it. No big speech, no big leap of faith. That's the real story behind almost every one of these transitions. Not a single leap, a slow crossing point, tracked on paper, month after month, until the farm income quietly became the bigger number. So here's what I actually want you to walk away with today. The number of animals you need was never really the question. You can run the math a dozen different ways depending on cattle, goats, chickens, pigs, whatever fits your land. The real question is whether you're building something that pays you or just building a bigger version of the job you're trying to escape. 200 animals and still broke is a real outcome. I've seen it happen to people who skipped the math and just bought more. Livestock done right is a cash flow asset. The land underneath it is usually appreciating while you're not even thinking about it. Put those two things together and you've got something a paycheck can never give you. An asset that's still yours even on the months you don't feel like working. I'm not telling you this is easy. It's not. But it is simpler than most people make it. Once you know your real number and you stop chasing herd size for its own sake. If this helped you think differently about land or livestock, stick around because next time I'm breaking down the exact land mistakes that cost new buyers thousands before they even plant their first fence post. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it.